All right, let's get right into it. The 1980s. It was so much more than just big hair and synthesizers. It was a decade of these really intense ideological battles, clashes that started out as pretty niche debates on college campuses, but then just exploded into a national firestorm. What we're going to do here is trace how these culture wars didn't just cause a few arguments, they literally redrew the political map of America.
And to really get a handle on the 80s, you almost have to start right here, with this idea from theorist Terry Eagleton. The fight wasn't just about policies or who was in office. Nope. It was a deep, deep struggle over the meaning of words, of ideas, and of America itself. It was a war over our most basic signs.
And this slide just perfectly captures the central contradiction of the entire decade. On the one hand, you had the Reagan administration loudly declaring America is back, a really powerful message of unity and confidence. But at the exact same time, you had this other thing happening. The social fabric was kind of breaking apart into what people started calling the hyphenization of America, this new intense focus on separate identity-based groups.
So where did all this tension first break through to the surface? Well, it was the American university. What started as academic squabbles over, believe it or not, reading lists would soon become the very first battleground in a much, much bigger ideological war.
At the absolute heart of all this campus conflict was this one single concept, the canon. And put simply, it's just the accepted list of great books, the works of philosophy and literature that every educated person was supposed to have read, the foundational texts of Western civilization.
Now, for a long, long time, the traditional view, summed up perfectly by the critic Matthew Arnold here, was that a university's main job was to pass down this specific cultural inheritance, to teach the best of the best. And for decades, that was basically the whole point of a humanities education. But in the 1980s, a new wave of campus radicals came along and launched this two-pronged attack on that whole idea. First, they argued the canon wasn't some universal truth. It was actually Western propaganda, a tool designed to promote just one worldview. And second, they said, hey, if we're going to have a shared list of great books, it has to actually represent all of America, not just a handful of dead white guys.
And this didn't just happen overnight. The great books tradition had been around for ages, but things really came to a head in 1988 at Stanford. And get this, the university didn't even get rid of its core curriculum. It just changed the name from Western culture and added a few non-Western authors to the reading list. That's it. And that one simple change absolutely lit the fuse.
This chant became the soundtrack to the whole thing. Students, led by big names like Jesse Jackson, were out there marching. They turned what was really an internal university decision into this huge national media spectacle. And to its critics, this chant symbolized nothing less than a full-on attack on Western civilization itself.
So the fight over the books, it quickly bled into something new, and maybe even more intense. A battle over what the media started calling political correctness, or PC. This was a movement on campus to try and regulate not just what students read, but what they said, and even how they acted, all in the name of not causing offense.
And what's so fascinating here is you can see the machinery of language at work. The goal was supposed to be neutrality, right? Chairman becomes the simple, ungendered chair. Handicapped is reframed as differently abled. But of course, as that last example shows, and that's from a satirist, this whole impulse sometimes went so far that it started to sound like a parody of itself.
And here's the really crucial part. This wasn't just about words. The movement created this whole new vocabulary to label and regulate behaviors. Things like lookism, judging people on their looks, or ethnoviolence, subtle racial insults. Universities were trying to govern every little piece of social interaction.
Okay, so let's look at how this all spiraled. These campus disputes over books and words could have just stayed on campus, but conservative activists and a media that was hungry for a story saw a huge opportunity. They skillfully took these academic spats and blew them up into a full-blown national moral panic.
By 1990, you've got the New York Times, the most influential newspaper in the country, reporting on PC not as some fringe trend, but as a dominant, hegemonic force taking over academia. The story had officially escaped the campus.
And from there, the language just got more and more extreme. Newsweek wasn't just covering a trend, it was framing it as this dangerous, totalitarian philosophy. And by calling it leftist McCarthyism, they did something really clever. They flipped the script on history, painting progressives as the new book burners.
It's really hard to overstate how heated this got.
A major newspaper accused professors, people who were literally just debating reading lists, of committing crimes against humanity. The whole thing had morphed into a moral panic, fueled by the most extreme language you can imagine.
And this media firestorm was then supercharged by a series of huge best-selling books from conservative authors. Guys like Alan Bloom, Dinesh D'Souza, and Roger Kimball took these complicated campus issues and basically packaged them for the general public as a simple and frankly terrifying story about radicals taking over the universities.
So, what was the long-term political result of all this? This wasn't just a simple debate. It turned into a crusade that helped forge a brand new and really powerful political identity, the neoconservatives.
And their philosophy, which was really hardened by all this turmoil, can be boiled down to three core beliefs. 1. A universal good exists, and it's the job of the elite to protect it. 2. Social hierarchy isn't just natural, it's absolutely necessary to avoid chaos. And 3, and this one is key, order isn't something that just happens. It must be actively imposed on the world, whether at home or abroad.
This quote from sociologist Todd Gitlin just nails the central criticism that was leveled against the academic left during this whole period. The accusation was pretty simple. While campus radicals were busy fighting these symbolic battles over culture, they were completely ignoring the actual fight for political power. The argument, basically, was that the left had walked away from the practical social arena to go fight a war of theory and words. They were seen as caring more about getting recognition for individual groups than fighting for a common good that could unite a big, powerful political movement.
And here's the political consequence of that shift, laid out plain and simple. According to critics like Gitlin, once you break society down into a collection of separate peoples, each with its own agenda, well, you lose the ability to speak for a single, unified people. And when you lose that, you lose the very foundation of your political power.
Okay, so that was the 1980s. But why are we still talking about it now? Well, because the battle lines that were drawn back then have left this incredibly long and powerful legacy that continues to shape the world we're all living in right now.
So if we boil it all down, the big takeaways are these. The 80s proved that what happens in the classroom definitely does not stay in the classroom. It turned language itself into a political battlefield. It helped create the modern neoconservative movement that would go on to shape world events for decades. And yeah, it carved out these deep, bitter cultural divides that we are all still dealing with today. And that brings us to a final question, one for you to think about. When you look at our public debates today, the arguments over free speech on campus, over identity politics, over what it even means to be an American, how much of it is really just an echo of those same fierce battles that kicked off more than 40 years ago?